Fasten your seatbelts for the realest Eagles and Sixers YouTuber! One who plays no clickbait and gets...
I could see at least two teams missing out with a winning record. Houston and Kansas City.
Really, it's going to be a battle of the two offenses in this case. So I predict a high-scoring game.
This is what they get for firing Brian Flores. You remember that 2021 season when the Dolphins won 7 in a row with Brian Flores just to get booted out of the playoffs and then terminated on Black Monday. Why would they even do that?
Offseason in terms of talent-wise, when they got Tyreek Hill, so they had the right talent the following year. If they had the exact same offseason with Brian Flores as the coach, how much different would have it gone? I don't know if we necessarily would have
been way different if Brian Flores.
It would have been better.
It would have been different with Brian Flores because he has a winning culture defense, but the offensive was pretty much god-awful.
Back in, like, say, Madden, the original Madden 25 franchise mode, it would have been generated during one of the off seasons. You get a random, like, Kurt Warner coming out of retirement or Ray Lewis coming out of retirement storyline. Good evening, folks. It is Tuesday. It is with Nikki Stees and my co-host, Agent Warrior X. We are back off an exhilarating divisional round, and now it's down to the final four. And out of the 4 possible Super Bowl scenarios, 3 of them would be rematches from past Super Bowls.
And then there was 4. Ladies and gentlemen, Championship Sunday is upon us. I'm your co-host, Agent Warrior X. Today is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026. 20 days into the new year. With that, you can see I'm in full Giants gear right now because there is one reason and one reason only. John Harbaugh has officially been hired as the next head coach for the New York Giants. And I called it. I said it a couple weeks ago as soon as he got terminated. I said the Giants will be a perfect fit for John Harbaugh because you already established the quarterback situation. You already established the running back position. You already established the wide receiver position. And you have the top 5 pick in the draft. Their front forward defense is elite. And he just finished his press conference this morning, so I'll give you the reason why the Giants made this the right move. Tom Coughlin. Tom Coughlin helped John Harbaugh to become the next head coach of the Giants. John Harbaugh was the same guy who made the Ravens during this 18-year tender to win a Super Bowl. But despite of all that, his expiration date, but they were still winning in spite of Harbaugh. But with him, with Jackson Dart, Cam Scottaboo, Malik Neighbors coming back in from an injury, Nikki, we're about to witness something special when it comes to teams like these. For the first time in a long time, that the New York Giants has officially have hope.
Hey, but it's interesting you say that because I remember, I'll use an example a few years back when Sean Payton retired for 1 year from coaching. Did his 1 year up at Fox Sports pregame and postgame. Then came back, went to the Denver Broncos. At the time, it looked like a risky move. It looked like maybe it had taken a step down, but he's proved them wrong. Here we are. First year didn't go so great, but you didn't have a good quarterback situation. Year 2, better situation, you made the playoffs. And year 3, they got home field advantage going into the conference championship game. So it's possible that with Harbaugh, even with the potential downsides, it could succeed. That's what happened with Sean Payton.
Exactly. And here's my second reason why the Giants made this move. They were desperate to find a winning coach for the first time since Tom Coughlin. When Tom Coughlin stepped down since 2015, the Giants have been having multiple losing seasons after losing seasons after losing seasons. Then enter Joe Judge. Terrible. Went from Pat Shurmur 2018, he was terrible. But when John Harbaugh came, I feel like this is going to be a completely different story. Number three, John Harbaugh and Jackson Dart. The similar situation with Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh when they drafted him in 2018. John Harbaugh with Jackson Dart might be a good combination because he could develop it really well, similar to Lamar Jackson. But I will say this for my hot take. In the next 2 years, when John Harbaugh has winning seasons, he's going to get Jackson Dart an MVP like candidate, and he's eventually going to get a Super Bowl in his 5 year tender with the Giants. Now, keep in mind, he signed a 5 year deal with the Giants for 5 years to see how this plays out. But in my perspective, I think this is a treat we're all witnessing.
Yep, and now it's only a matter of time. Time will tell. Plus, don't forget there are free agents from the Ravens that could potentially sign and make the move to the Giants. Isaiah Likely's been one of the rumor guys that could cross over. You have a center who's a free agent. You got to wonder if the Giants will be willing to throw the bag, especially being they need help on the line.
You
So
mean
it's
Tyler
possible.
Luddenbaum? You mean Tyler Luddenbaum from the Ravens?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, but there are guys that could follow suit.
And you know what else? You forgot Todd Monken. Todd Monken was also rumored to come here to follow Harbaugh's footsteps in terms of the offensive coordinator. Tom Monken had an interview with the Browns. We know that. Mike McDaniels withdrew this interview for the Browns. We know that. But Todd Monken, he was the same offensive coordinator who got Georgia Bulldogs back-to-back championships with Carson Beck. It wasn't because of the defense becoming the best. It was basically Carson Beck's offense. And speaking of Carson Beck, if you witnessed what happened last night at the national championship, my God, it was a really close battle between the Indiana Hoosiers and the Miami Hurricanes. Fernando Mendoza did his part, but it wasn't enough because the fact that he didn't even bother scoring a touchdown. Oh wait, he did. He had a rushing touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown against the Hurricanes. And don't get me wrong, I said defense wins championships between the Hurricanes and the Hoosiers. But unfortunately for Miami, they came up short once again, which is why Indiana, for the first time since 2010 in college basketball, have officially crowned as national champions.
Yep, and that's a crazy feel-good story because you don't think of Indiana in college sports as a football team. You think of them as a basketball team. Think of Larry Bird, the 2010 championship. You don't really think of football, and it's great for them that they get this one shining moment in the
Georgia
football
Knight,
world.
Georgia Knight carried that team.
So congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers. And speaking of coaches, it's interesting because we have a few other vacancies that were filled in too. You had Joe Hafley, the defensive coordinator for the Packers, going to the Miami Dolphins. The Atlanta Falcons got former Browns coach Kevin Stefanski. And who else was there? Well,
The
Raiders are
Titans
still
got
looking.
the Titans got Robert Saleh.
Oh my gosh. I feel like Saul went right back to where he was with the Jets before.
Literally, after 1 year with the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers, he went straight back to head coaching to the Tennessee Titans with Cam Ward, which, by the way, it's an interesting pick. Have you learned nothing for the New York Jets?
I mean, especially being that there's a head coaching opportunity that looks like golden that just opened up yesterday. That Slay could have gone to, where he would have had a quarterback and he could have built that team a better defense. That being the Buffalo Bills head coaching vacancy. He could have at least decided to weigh that option out. That would have been a much better place for him to go than Tennessee.
By the way, back to the Jeff Hassie hire. Nobody should be shocked about this. The fact that the Dolphins decided to terminate Chris Kreider and hire a former Packers GM and decided to hire Jeff Hasley, I don't think it was the right move. And by the way, they fumbled Harbaugh 3 times now. They missed out on Jim Harbaugh in the early 2010s. They missed out Jim Harbaugh again, and they missed out on John Harbaugh, which, by the way, similar to the Los Angeles Chargers back 2 years ago when they hired Jim Harbaugh from Michigan Wolverines. He made Justin Herbert a really good quarterback, but the problem was the offense wasn't clicking enough. But the Giants, when they hired John Harbaugh, they got a good coach. I would say John Harbaugh is the better brother than Jim Harbaugh, if you look at it perspective wise.
But it's crazy now that you mentioned it because the Dolphins, all their blunderings over the years, it to me validates all those critics that say the Miami Dolphins ruined Dan Marino's shot at a Super Bowl. The more I think about it, yeah, the Dolphins have had a lot of blunders over the years and have cost themselves opportunities. See 2008. They had the number one pick. They picked Jake Long, a tackle, who was pretty good, but they passed on him over Matt Ryan.
Which, by the way, Matt Ryan for the Atlanta Falcons during where Rich McKay's tender was actually a really good quarterback and replaced Michael Vick. And by the way, he got them to multiple playoff appearances. Yes, he won a few NFC South titles with the Falcons, but ultimately they got a few blunders aside. They lost to the Falcons in the divisional round against the Packers, and they beat the Packers 10 years ago in the NFC Championship for the first time since 98. And that's the last time the Falcons made it to the championship, ultimately blowing a lead, 28-3 lead to the New England Patriots.
Yep, and we'll definitely have some conference championship memories to talk about. I even wrote some down just to have them on tap. But as far as the coaches go, I did want to say something about Stefanski. I feel like it's the upgrade for the Falcons because this is a Stefanski who somehow got the Cleveland Browns, the most dysfunctional front office in the NFL, to the playoffs twice. That's at least respectable. Now, if the Falcons can have something to work with at QB, then maybe this could be a good hire.
The thing is, the Falcons still has a quarterback problem. Decided to trade an edge rusher for a year too late. Decided to trade next year's first round pick to the Los Angeles Rams, especially if you're having a quarterback problem when you tampered the big bucks to Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and now, but yeah, so we'll have to see how that one works out. But while we're still talking about coaching vacancies, let's talk about the Buffalo Bills a little bit. Sean McDermott, it's an interesting one because here's a team that's been to the playoffs every year but one since he took over in 2017. And they kept falling out short in the playoffs, and they just decided, I guess, they want a fresh voice in the locker room. But sometimes that can work in your favor. The ultimate win-win for both organization and coach, Tampa Bay parting ways with Tony Dungy. Tampa got the coach that helped them beat the Raiders, and Tony Dungy got the best quarterback he ever coached in Peyton Manning in a Super Bowl out of it. Or see the Broncos got rid of John Fox in between their two Super Bowl appearances with Peyton Manning. They had that one and done versus the Colts. They moved John Fox, got Gary Kubiak, and it helped. So who knows? Maybe if they get the right guy, this could help them.
You know, speaking of the Broncos, I honestly feel sorry for Bo Nix.
Man, if you was ever a team that you on paper lost while winning, it would be the Denver Broncos in that game on Saturday, because you defeat the Buffalo Bills in a game that a lot of people thought Buffalo would win despite Denver having the better record, and Denver ultimately won the game. Now, the overtime call was a bit iffy, but at the same time, you could also blame Buffalo for giving up a strip sack in the first half and being down 10. If they scored more points in the first half, they probably wouldn't be in that predicament. But then for Bo Nix to get an injury in a win with the AFC Championship game at home, he could have had this injury early in the regular season. He could have came back in time to lead him to the playoffs. But 4 to 6 weeks going into conference championship, it's can't do it. You got to hope Jared Stidham pulls like the biggest backup QB miracle in NFL history.
I'll be shocked if Jared Stidham pulls a Nick Foles type of thing.
But here's the big difference, though, between both Foles and then, say, Hostetler or Kurt Warner or Tom Brady. Those guys had time to get ready for that situation. They had time to practice, got some playing experience in beforehand, so they were ready for that conference championship stage and eventually their Super Bowl wins in all 4 respective cases. But for Stidham, he didn't have any regular season time to get ready. to get used to playing with his guys. I mean, yes, you'll have a week to practice, but you get more used to it in the game. You learn to adjust as you go through the game. And in an all or nothing game, it might be too late to have to rely on a backup quarterback when you need them on the same page now.
But back to Sean McDermott. I think, in my opinion, that was a bad move. Similar to what Brian Dable did with the Giants being part of ways. And why promote Bean, who, by the way, has a bad GM track record in terms of drafting, and you promoted him to president of operations? This has to be a dead team walking for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, if you got someone who can't draft, then look at Bill Belichick. He was an excellent coach, but then when he became GM, now when Brady was still there, Brady helped them out tremendously. But when Brady was gone and you still had Belichick as the GM and coach, you saw the poor drafting that Belichick made his GM get exposed. If Josh Allen were to go down with a season-ending injury or be unavailable for some reason, you would see that poor track record get exposed in Buffalo.
And that's exactly why that Buffalo went from a legit Super Bowl contender to a closing Super Bowl contending team. Now, on to the championship Sunday between the Broncos and Patriots. Rematch of the 2015 AFC Championship with Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. For Stidham, I don't think he's ready. If Bo Nix never broke his ankle, he would have never been in that situation. For the representing the AFC, New England, it's Drake May's time now, especially if you having Mike Vrabel as your head coach. The defense looks great. You still got Stephon Diggs. You still got Lavondre Stevenson. You still got Travion Henderson. And Christian Gonzalez still great. But ultimately, the Patriots will go back to the Super Bowl for the first time since 2018.
I mean, yeah. And it's crazy because Drake May in that game, piggyback 1 week a second, he had a mixed game. He had 3 touchdowns, but 3 turnovers, 2 fumbles, and a pick. Also, on the flip side, CJ Stroud did the Patriots wonders. Not to take anything away from the Patriots, because Drake May, CJ Stroud could learn this. If you're going to make those mistakes, at least make enough plays to help your team win. And Drake May, despite his mistakes, still threw 3 touchdown passes, and that helped them win that game. So the Broncos will kind of be a similar story. It'll be a tough test, but ultimately Drake May will probably still make enough plays. Probably have at least 1 or 2, probably 2 scores, either 2 passing touchdowns or rushing and a passing, and that could be enough to get them past the Denver Broncos in this game. So I could see something similar playing out with Drake May, where he has his ups and downs, but the ups are enough to help them win the game.
What the heck? The Texans had every advantage in the books in terms of elite defense this whole year. And the offense has been top 20 in the playoffs because of C.J. Stroud's decision making. Yes, I understand it was a defensive game in the first half with the Steelers and Texans, but it wasn't enough against the Patriots and Texans. And 5 turnovers against the Patriots defense. You're telling me C.J. Stroud in the playoffs has played absolutely terrible since God knows when, and the defense has been playing terrible. What a freaking joke.
And you know what this is reminding me of? The Monsters of the Midway with Rex Grossman as their quarterback. It's crazy. CJ Stroud went from being rookie of the year, looking like he had the potential to be a top 5 quarterback and compete with Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes for the top quarterbacks in the AFC, to looking like Rex Grossman on the Monsters of the Midway Bears with Brian Urlacher, Lance Briggs, Peanut Tillman, and Nathan Vasher and those guys. It's like 2 different players.
What a waste of a defensive team. I'll tell you that. And Will Anderson, by the way, is a free agent this year. What a waste of talent that is.
Now, we can learn from, if you want to learn from someone, learn from the New England Patriots opponent, the Denver Broncos. Now, Bo Nix, he's kind of an enigma because one week you'll be drawing Tebow comparisons where they win, but Nix doesn't play the best. But then there are other games where Bo Nix steps up and delivers, like the game against the Buffalo Bills. Even if CJ Stroud could just have a season like Bo Nix, they would have been in better position.
Which, by the way, I could see at this point in terms of CJ Stroud becoming the best quarterback. I don't see him in the best quarterback in playoffs. Sure, he can win you a wild card game, but he simply can't get past the second round of the AFC playoffs. Now, for the NFC, we have the Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, they were coming off a very gritty victory against the Bears with Iceman Caleb Williams. Ultimately, for the Bears, I feel for them. If only they won that game in overtime, they would have been down to two teams back to the NFC Championship, the Bears and the Seahawks. But ultimately, it's the Rams, Matthew Stafford becoming the greatest quarterback in the playoffs. Now, between Sam Darnold and Matthew Stafford, I could see this playing out in one side. Who would win? It's going to come down between the final quarter. The winner of this, Seattle. It's Seattle's time. This ain't no Legion of Boom. There ain't no Marshawn Lynch. This ain't no Russell Wilson. And it sure as hell ain't Drew Lock either. This Seattle team looks similar to the Legion of Boom back in the early 2010s. Seahawks, Patriots, Super Bowl 2014 rematch.
Yeah, and this is really going to be an interesting game because we talk about the Rams actually, they've got 4 takeaways in between the 2 playoff games. So their defense is actually a little bit better than expected. But then you got, on the flip side, the Seattle Seahawks defense. I mean, it depends on which point of view you want to look at it. You could call them the LOB 2.0, or you could just call them an excellent defense, whichever way you want to put it. You got guys like Kobe with a C, Bryant, Ernest Jones, DeMarcus Lawrence. You still have a solid
Julian
all-around
Love.
crew. Yep, and it's a mix of veterans and young players, which is good because the veterans can still bring that leadership and experience present and pass it on to the younger players, and you've got a lot of talented young players too. That's a good blend to have on defense. And then on offense, you still got Jackson Smith, Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed, who we know from special teams, watch out because he can fly to the house.
Shaheed was something else at the beginning of the game. That had me mind-blowing when he returned for a touchdown.
Right. And it's like you look at it based off what did happen, that set the momentum for the rest of the game. Once that happened, the 49ers had nothing. And then you still have Kenneth Walker. While it is unfortunate, they lost their backup running back, but they still got Kenneth Walker, and that could help out against the Rams.
But the real question is it going to be enough against Durant and other defenders? We may never know. So for the Super Bowl, we have the Seahawks and the Patriots. We're going to find out come before Super Bowl Sunday. But in the meantime, let's take a trip down memory lane to Championship Sunday, shall we?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier you wrote this down in your paper. What's your favorite Championship Sunday memory?
I mean, my favorite personally comes as an Eagles fan from the first time I saw him clinch the Super Bowl, 2004. There was like a snowy blizzard. I remember it. Then the very next day, because this snow blizzard was a Saturday, comes Sunday, we got NFC Championship game, McNabb versus Vic. Eagles had been there before, but they just couldn't get over the hump. Their final game at Veterans Stadium, Ricky Manning Jr. the previous year, not to mention the year before that, the Rams, but they finally got over the hump. It was the McNabb to Chad Lewis touchdown pass that pretty much sealed it late in the fourth quarter with the Eagles up 20-10, sent them back to the Super Bowl. Then, of course, you had 2017 was another favorite moment of mine. Those are the two that stand out the most. And I've gotten a little more used to that feeling in recent years from conference championship games. But the first one and the second one stand out the most.
If I had to choose the best playoff championship Sunday memory, I know I wasn't a kid back then, but I would say the Giants and 49ers. Not the 2011 Giants and 49ers, the 1990 Giants and 49ers. The 49ers were one step closer to get to the Super Bowl. It was down between Phil Simms and Joe Montana, two of the greatest quarterbacks of the late 80s. Yes, you may have the Bengals going to the Super Bowl in 88, but that team between the Giants and 49ers, that was a legit playoff rivalry team. Lawrence Taylor getting sacked, Roger Craig going getting a costly interception or fumble, and most of all, the Big Blue Wrecking Crew went to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1986, which, by the way, celebrates 40 years of the New York Giants, the New York Mets winning the World Series and the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not a Mets fan, I'm a Yankee, but it's true. The Giants won the Super Bowl in 86 against the Broncos. We destroyed the Bills because of a wide right from Scott Norwood. And that's pretty much it from the 80s and 90s. But however, now onto the 2011 Giants and 49ers. That game, in my opinion, was the best. Yes, you can argue it's saying that the 49ers played his butt off in spite of Colin Kaepernick, but it wasn't enough. Yes, Jim Harbaugh coached that team, but ultimately Kyron Williams fumbled at the worst time possible. And because of that, we have defeated the 49ers again at the last home turf of their old stadium, ultimately beating the Patriots with the Mario Manningham catch and the Patriots in Super Bowl 46.
Right. And man, it's crazy though, because you talk about heartbreaking farewell tours for stadiums, that is. The Eagles' final season at Veterans Stadium. It just seemed like it was destined to be. They would win that game, and the opening kickoff, when Brian Mitchell got it down to Tampa Bay's 30-ish, it seemed like, oh yeah, it's going to happen. But then we flash forward to the fourth quarter. Bucks are up 20-10. McNabb throws that interception. Rondé Barber does a coast-to-coast pick six, and that was it. Pretty much silence from the Eagles fan base. Even Brian Dawkins in an interview said that was the one time he didn't hear anybody heckling them after a home loss. They were just absolute silent. But then the Eagles kind of made up for it by spoiling the Vikings' chance to be the first team to have a Super Bowl in their home stadium en route to their first Super Bowl win with Nick Foles, which has parallels similar to Jeff Hostetler with the Giants. But what's crazy is Parcells actually did an interview, I remember, right after Wentz got injured, saying that he could still have said basically at the time, saying, I could still see the Eagles winning with Nick Foles. Ironic that of all people, Bill Parcells, the one guy who led the second famous run with a backup quarterback, the first being Jim Plunkett with the Raiders, was the guy who actually called his former division rival, the Eagles, being able to do it and win their first Super Bowl.
Speaking of Bill Parcells, yes, he made Lawrence Taylor one of the greatest defenders of all time alongside Carl Banks and Leonard Marshall. But if I had to choose another good playoff memory for championship Sunday memory, would have to be the Giants and the Packers. 2007 NFC Championship with Brett Favre's last game as a Packer. He threw that costly interception, and the Giants won to go back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 6 years. Speaking of the 2001 NFC Championship, I remember that blowout from Kerry Collins. Yes, Dante Culpepper didn't even bother showing up, but that Giants offense literally blew them out.
Dude, and what's crazy too is sometimes the fun part is seeing the upsets play out in conference championship. It has like a different type of feel when someone plays spoiler and catches everybody by surprise. We saw actually that same day out west, the Raiders were at home against the Ravens, and it just seemed like it was the Raiders' time. Al Davis would get that one more ring. He had a young, hungry John Gruden at the time. And the Ravens, while a good team, didn't seem like the complete team. But you had a long touchdown by Shannon Sharp that helped set the tone. And the Ravens defense did the rest and
And I
sent the
say that
Raiders
Ray
home.
Lewis is one of the best defenders in Ravens, ultimately leading the Ravens to a Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history until they beat the Giants. And I kid you not, that Giants team with Kerry Collins looked solid on paper with the first half, but ultimately losing to the Ravens because of their defense. And I said Ray Lewis is one of the best defenders. Speaking of Baltimore, that those two games with the New England Patriots, 2011 and 2012,
Yep.
that one missed kick in 2011 was crucial. That 2012 game against the Patriots, amazing. And that was with John Harbaugh during that time. And before John Harbaugh made Joe Flacco a Super Bowl MVP, Joe Flacco was a special teams coordinator. Keep in mind that he used to coach for you guys as a special teams coordinator with Andy Reid.
You're right. And what's crazy, and Andy Reid. Now, to be fair, he had plenty of experience in conference championship games too. You know what's interesting? Now, Super Bowl 31, Packers, Patriots, they respectively won their conference championship games. They were favorites to win. But what was interesting about that was for the NFC side, you had the Packers playing the Carolina Panthers, who were only in their second year in the NFL. On the AFC side, you had the Patriots playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were only in their second year in the NFL. And this actually, along with the two Super Bowls against the Patriots, ties into Tom Coughlin's case as a Hall of Fame coach. Even though he didn't win in Jacksonville, he got them to the AFC Championship game twice in their first 5 years as a team. And that's something that adds to Tom Coughlin's resume. And that's part of the reason why the Giants brought him in the first place.
Because the fact that Tom Coughlin, yes, he made Kurt Warner a really solid quarterback, but in his first NFC East title in 2005. But the very next year, he was on the brink of termination. Before that 2007 season, he was on the brink of termination. Strahan was slowly declining, and Eli Manning was on his first legs, baby steps before he went to the Super Bowl. In the playoffs, Eli Manning is a god until 2016. From the 2007 team and 2011 Giants team, it was carried by defense. That 2017 was carried by defense. The 2011 season with the Giants was a literal tank division.
That's an interesting one. I mean, they may have made history being the only 9-7 team. But also you've had the 49ers and Cowboys, because there's at least three NFC championship games. 1981, the catch by Dwight Clark, which pretty much started the 49ers dynasty. 92, the Cowboys beat them to get to the Super Bowl, which was their first in that stretch of 3 wins in 4 years. The Super Bowl in between the Cowboys, the 49ers won, but they beat the Cowboys to get there. And they were dominating early. The Cowboys almost came back. But there was a questionable call where Deion Sanders, who was a 49er at that season, may have held Michael Irvin on a non-call. Ironically, Deion then joined the Cowboys the next year for Super Bowl 30.
You know something about Dallas? They're one of those teams back then was one of the greatest dynasties in the early 90s. And since then, they've been nothing but delusional and false claims and false hope. Even with Tony Romo, with that Cowboys team, even with Dak Prescott on that team. But ultimately, Dallas nowadays is average team, which average things. But speaking of that, the 49ers you mentioned earlier in NFC Championship appearances. You didn't mention Steve Young. Steve Young was the best quarterback in the mid 90s. Yes, he may have won a championship with Deion Sanders, but Steve Young during that time was slowly declining. But as for the championship memories, now we're gonna go all the way back to the 90s. And I'm talking about the Buffalo Bills quadruple championships. He That defense was elite. Yes, Jim Kelly. Yes, Frank Wright may have gotten them multiple Super Bowl appearances, but it was most of the time the defense. The defense literally carried that team.
And
Yes,
that first time they got there, they curb stomped the Raiders, which is why the Giants were underdogs headed into the game.
and that's exactly why during that time that not Kurt, Jeff Hosteller was their backup during that time. Yes, Jim Kelly or Frank White did their part, but ultimately Scott Norwood ruined that team. And because of that, they lost to the Giants in 90. The very next year, they lost to the Commanders, which, by the way, they haven't been before last year. They haven't been to the NFC Championship since 92, since 91. And it was against the Detroit Lions. Ultimately, for the Commanders making it back to the Super Bowl and winning it against the Bills. Then the final 2 years was the Bills in Dallas. That Cowboys defense and the offense in the mid 90s was amazing, especially when you're going up against Frank Wright, though. But the Houston Oilers really choked with Warren Moon during that time.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole nother story right there. Matter of fact, that whole Warren Moon got to a situation where there was like either 93 or 94. The Oilers said, you know what, we're either winning this year or we're blowing it up. And when they didn't, the team was extremely dysfunctional. I mean, you thought Days of Our Steelers was crazy. That Oilers team, Buddy Ryan punching the offensive coordinator, the team flaming out in the playoffs, and then literally decide to blow it up, even going as far as to relocate to Nashville.
Enter Tennessee Titans in the late 90s. But ultimately, for the Bills during the early 90s, was nothing more than quadruple AFC championships. 90 against the Raiders, 91 Chiefs, 92 Dolphins, 93. Was it the Raiders? No, 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 no. I don't think so. And yes, I do remember that one point that the New York Jets eventually made it back to the AFC Championship at one point in 2010.
Back to
Yes,
back years. The last time the Jets were ever contenders.
Mark Sanchez at that point was pretty solid with Rex Ryan. That's pretty much it. But ultimately, they lost to the Peyton Manning Colts, and they lost to Big Ben when Mike Tomlin was coaching that team.
Man, and it's crazy to think how the Jets, mighty Jets, have fallen, because that was it. And there was also the 1998 season going back before that. Vinny Testaverde, Bill Parcells, Keyshawn Johnson. They were underdogs against the Broncos, who were the defending champs. They were winning at halftime slightly, but ultimately the Broncos won. But speaking of favorites and underdogs, on the NFC side, the Minnesota Vikings with Randall Cunningham, comeback player of the year, Chris Carter in Hall of Fame form, Randy Moss, dominant rookie. It just seemed like it was meant to be. And then late in the game, Gary Anderson misses a field goal. Falcons go down the field, tie in OT. Morton Anderson for the Falcons makes it. The Falcons made it to the Super Bowl. And I kind of feel like we were robbed of the better matchup between Minnesota and Denver, which I still believe Denver would have won, but I think Minnesota would have matched better against Denver, and it would have been a more competitive game. But sometimes that's the way it works out. You get those upsets.
And it's because the fact that Shannon Sharp and John Elway was one of the best quarterbacks and tight ends during that time, and Terrell Davis too. Don't forget Terrell Davis too.
Yep. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, hey, but sometimes those Cinderella runs happen. And if you want to talk about AFC Championship game upsets, talk about 2021, Kansas City versus Cincinnati. After Kansas
That was
City
the
made,
upset of the decade.
yeah, after they,
Between Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, this was the upset of the decade. Between LSU and Texas Tech, it's like LSU being the undefeated team. It's like Texas Tech with the Kingsbury coaching that team becoming the best. But ultimately, LSU comes out on top, which is why Cincinnati, when that field goal was made, it was an underdog story.
I
They haven't made
remember
it back to the Super Bowl
the
since
interception.
1988.
From that very moment, I remember looking up at the TV, seeing Mahomes throw that pick in overtime. And I remember the shock hit me of, oh my gosh, the Bengals are actually going to make it to the Super Bowl. And yeah, sure enough, they did. Sometimes you get those special Cinderella runs and they're special because they don't always happen. That's what makes it so special.
Speaking of the Vikings, if only the Vikings kicker didn't miss that field goal in 98 and the Jets would have beaten the Broncos, it would have been the Jets versus Vikings. And who could have won that? The Jets. The Jets would have won their second championship. But considering how the Vikings throughout their tender, they lost to the Falcons and they lost to the they
There's
lost
a
to the
lot of NFC championship losses. They're the most cursed NFC championship team now I think about it.
they lost to the Falcons, they lost to our team, they lost to you guys,
The
and
Saints.
the Saints. That one game against the Saints divisional one was crazy, and they even lost to us in the wild card series, and that was pretty much it. Since then, the Vikings hasn't got past the first round since 2018.
And there was an infamous drop pass in the late 80s against Washington in the conference championship that helped Washington win that game. And Doug Williams made history in the Super Bowl. So that also played a role in history too. And speaking of Washington, there was an infamous game in 83 where they upset the 49ers to get to the Super Bowl. They fell short against the Marcus Allen-led Raiders, but that's one of those kind of forgotten about upsets.
During that 83 season, I heard there was a strike during that time.
It was somewhere in the mid 80s, so it was probably around that time frame, potentially that season.
For the Commanders, I really feel happy for them last year when they made it back to the NFC Championship for the first time since 1991. And the last time that happened, the NFC East showdown happened, was you guys and the Commanders. Before that, you had the Giants and Commanders, which is why I'm going to bring that up next. It was mostly a defensive game for the New York Giants. Yes, you may have Lawrence Taylor, but yes, you may have Joe Theismann before his career-ending injury. You may have all these Commanders players, but it wasn't enough against that Big Blue Wrecking Crew.
Oh, yeah. Now, that was the era where there were so many different pairings between the NFC East throughout the playoffs, period. That was an interesting time. But if we also want to talk about surprises, there's also the comebacks. 06, Indianapolis, New England. The Bears had punched their ticket earlier, and then it came time. Indy was down 21-6. It looked like New England was going to go back and win their 4th and 6th seasons. But Indianapolis ultimately came back, got the go-ahead touchdown. Then at the end of the game, when Brady got the ball at less than a minute, Peyton had his head down the entire time because he knew Brady had enough time. But the interception happened. It's funny. All of a sudden, Peyton Manning hears the crowd roaring. He finally looks up and starts jumping up and down, realizing they got the game-sealing interception. And then the Colts completed the comeback. And actually, we talked about Atlanta. They blew the Super Bowl, but they also blew a big lead against the 49ers at home in 2012 with the chance to go to Super Bowl 47.
I completely forgot about that. I completely forgot about the 49ers beating the Falcons with Matt Ryan. I think the Falcons overall just wasted Matt Ryan's career. He had so much potential, eventually becoming a Super Bowl champion similar to Dan Marino. His play style was similar to Dan Marino, but Matt Ryan ultimately blew that in terms of the NFC Championship in 2012 and the Super Bowl in 2017.
Man, yeah, but there was a ton of memories. You got those ones too. And there's infamous moments. 2 of them occurred, AFC Championship games in the 1980s. You had John Elway lead a long drive down the field for a comeback over the Cleveland Browns. Then the very next year, Ernest Byer, whatever his name was, fumbles the ball when the Browns were trying to score the go-ahead touchdown late. Those 4 words, the drive followed by the fumble, forever haunt the Cleveland Browns.
You know what else? You didn't mention the NFC Championship infamous moments, like that 2011 Giants and 49ers game I mentioned earlier. Calvin Williams fumbled. That was one of the worst times to fumble. And ultimately, for the Giants heading back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 5 years.
And speaking of bad moments, Brett Favre making one of the most reckless throws in an NFC Championship game when they could have either ran the clock out a little bit and tried a long field goal. But instead, Favre makes a reckless throw, gets intercepted. Saints win the toss in overtime, kick the field goal. Remember, that was sudden death was the rules at the time, so it was over. That interception was the last throw of that season.
What about that 2007 NFC Championship game with the Giants and Packers? That one reckless interception he did. It wasn't just the fact that he did a reckless thing back in 2008 or 2009. We're talking about that 2007 NFC Championship where Brett Favre played his final game as a Packer, ultimately met the Giants playing spoiler. But his infamous moment was that one interception he did.
Yep, and of course we talked about the catch, Dwight Clark, 49ers Cowboys, the first Super Bowl run for the 49ers, leading to their first win a few weeks later, I believe, against the Cincinnati Bengals. So there was that moment that stands out as far as just moments itself. Of course, Billy Cundiff's miss.
And of course, we'll save all that Super Bowl memories for another time. But in the meantime, the final thing I want to say for my hot take is that the Patriots will blow out the Broncos. They will no be surprised because Drake May will possibly become the AFC Championship MVP, leading to the Patriots for the Super Bowl for the first time since 2018. The hot take for Seattle, this is going to be a tough one. Sam Darnold, this is going to play out like a Thursday night football game. The Rams will have a lead. The Seattle Seahawks will make a comeback. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the wire in overtime, like they did on Thursday night football. Ultimately, Rams play spoiler.
Yeah,
So the Rams will be playing against the Patriots.
For me, I'm just telling. I'm pretty much sure it's going to be the Patriots winning, and we're going to get a Super Bowl rematch in some way, shape, or form. I'll say this: the X factor for that NFC Championship game is whether or not Sam Darnold makes mistakes turning the ball over. That's going to be the big X factor there.
What about Puka Nacua playing his part? What about Devontae Adams playing his part? I think that could be the X factor too.
And really, there's a ton of different factors that tie into this game, but ultimately, it's really going to come down to who makes the least crucial mistakes.
I think for less crucial mistakes should definitely be the Rams. The most crucial mistakes should definitely be the Seahawks because I have a gut feeling that Sam Darnold might be doing something stupid. We know for a fact that he sucked in the playoffs, but this is a completely different team now. So the hot take I said earlier, I could be right, I could be wrong. The second hot take, I could be right, it could be wrong. But there's one final playoff conference championship memory that I do remember.
Ooh.
The Legion of Boom. 2013 with the Seahawks versus the Packers. It's only right because the Seahawks haven't made it to the NFC Championship since then.
But
the
if
Legion of Boom, the Legion of Boom was one of the greatest defensive names since the greatest show on turf. Yes, you may have Bobby Wagner. Yes, you may have Von Miller. Yes, you may have all those defensive players led by Dan Quinn. But ultimately, it was enough to win a Super Bowl here in New York. But the very next year, Russ played horrible in that one slant, and he botched it.
But wait, there's something else that came to mind. Two things. First, when the Seahawks beat the Niners to go to the Super Bowl against Denver, we all remember Richard Sherman was shaking hands with the players. He went to shake Crabtree's hand. Crabtree pushed him in the face, got Sherman upset, and he was interviewed right afterward. And he said, well, I'm the best corner in the game. And when you try with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. And the other one, 1980, Philadelphia Eagles, Dick Vermeil, Ron Jaworski, Wilbert Montgomery going against the Roger Staubach, Tom Landry Cowboys, who were still fresh off numerous Super Bowl appearances in the 70s, a few wins and losses, but the Eagles, after being a dumpster fire for the 70s, finally had their moment in the conference championship, beating the Cowboys and making it to their first Super Bowl.
Ultimately losing to the Raiders.
And that's the first great backup fill-in story when Jim Plunkett filled in, I believe, for Ken Stabler.
You know, if Bo Jackson would have stayed that team a little longer, he would have won a couple championships with the Raiders.
But obviously, sometimes the nice things happen, but sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. But we'll see what feel-good and heartbreaking stories are to follow on Sunday during the conference championship games, which will then be followed up by the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 60.
Which is why in February is going to be a legendary February, because we have the All-Star game coming on NBC. We have Super Bowl 60, and of course, the Winter Olympics next month. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, this is AJ Warrior X signing off of NFL Pickems Championship Sunday Edition. Good night, everybody.
And for Nikki Stees, the host of it, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for joining. I put both our channel links in the chat. There's the link to Agent Warrior's channel. There's the link to my channel. So for myself and Agent Warrior X, have a great night. We'll catch you next week when we know what Super Bowl 60 will be.